Hey y'all, this is episode number 21. The Sovereign Individual Podcast is legally allowed to drink now. This is a recap of the second night of the Democrat Party debates, presidential debates. So, a lot to go over here, and it's a longer episode as well. So much for trying to keep them short and sweet. But I hope you would get some good stuff out of this one. There's kind of a lot to talk about. As far as different things that we're saying and about specifically the candidates who were on the stage as well. So I think there's some good stuff in here. Thank you once again to Flavor Aid, who created the intro music you're about to hear. Please go check out their EP, All My Life, on Spotify and wherever you stream music. And I hope you enjoy the episode. What's up, y'all? This is the Sovereign Individual Podcast. I'm your host, Eric Guerra. Thank you once again for being here. And if you're liking what you're hearing so far, please subscribe, rate, and review the show. And share it with anybody you think might enjoy listening to it. So this is going to be the recap of night 2 of the Democrat Party's presidential debates, primary debates, whatever you want to call them. I was intending to get this out on Friday and record it, but my car's transmission had other ideas, so I was dealing with that, and then didn't have a chance to get to it yesterday, so we're a little bit late as far as getting the recap out, but still only a couple days removed, so really not that late, all things considered. So this was kind of talked about like it was going to be the bigger night. You had the bigger names, you had the top candidates as far as polling goes in Biden and Bernie. And then you had Kamala Harris, who isn't really polling that well, and still gets talked about in that same vein. You had Andrew Yang there, who's very popular on the internet. He's got his Yang gang that he talks about. We're going to talk about him a little bit and some interesting stuff that went on there. And then, nobody else really that important, I guess, on this one. So let's just go ahead and jump into it, and let's see what was being talked about. So, one of the earlier questions on was talking about raising taxes, and they were specifically asking Bernie if he would raise taxes on the middle class, and at first he tried to avoid it. And I can't remember which moderator it was, but they came back, asking him directly, would the taxes on the middle class be raised? At which point he said yes, but they would save on healthcare premiums and other stuff. I can't remember all the things that he listed off that he would be saving on. That's all nice, and that may be true for like a year or two. Before the government starts stealing more money from you, and then you're not going to end up saving much at all. You're going to end up paying way more in taxes, and that's anybody who listens to this knows how I feel about taxes. So let's see here. Biden will eliminate the Trump tax cuts. So again, talking about raising taxes on folks and businesses. Kamala actually said, kind of rightfully so, that the middle class are going to be the ones footing the bill for the debt that we have, which is true and a poignant point, but then she didn't offer any solutions as to how we're going to get out of debt. And that was pretty much, again, the only time it came up in the entire debate, much as it didn't come up at all in the first night's debate. And 22 million in debt is nothing to write off or forget about, and none of the folks on this stage are offering any sort of plans that are going to reduce spending or get the budget in balance and start moving towards getting that debt down. So it's interesting that Kamala would bring something like that up and then offer no solutions to it. Hickenlooper sounded actually reasonable throughout the debate. He was bringing up that the party didn't need to be moving towards socialism, and that he was experiencing success in Colorado implementing the ideas that they're talking about on the stage without big government. So that's kind of a fresh breath of air, that he was saying, you don't need big government to do the things that we're talking about. So kind of a nice thing to hear. We'll talk a little bit about him a little more later on. Gillibrand spoke in support of, I can't remember the exact term she used, if it was true capitalism or something along those lines, and saying that that's not what we have right now, which again is a very poignant point, and one that I completely agree with. We have crony capitalism for sure, but then everything that she's bringing up involves the expansion of government and government being involved more in different parts of the economy, which is only going to increase the amount of crony capitalism. Crony capitalism exists because the government has involved itself in the economy, and therefore there is incentive to bribe and lobby the government and use its power in order to gain a competitive advantage in the marketplace, especially when it comes to regulations. Like I've said before, these corporations are writing the very regulations that they're going to then be held to abide by, specifically because they want to keep out competition. They know that they can handle the costs of those regulations, but any competition that they would have coming in wouldn't be able to do so. So anytime you're speaking about capitalism, if in the next breath you're talking about increasing the size and the scope of government, no thanks. You're not getting to the root of what the actual problem is when it comes to crony capitalism or corporatism. You could put it that way as well. Mayor Pete Buttigieg, I think it's I don't know exactly. It's one of those, I've heard it like 17 times already, and I still can't quite get exactly how to pronounce his last name. But he does not want free college, which is an interesting take. And he's also not a fan of the bailing out of the student loans. And his argument is basically that the working class shouldn't be subsidizing the more elite class and, bailing them out of these college debt when they're not going to reap the benefits of having that college education. And then when it comes to free education, he's saying it shouldn't be free for everybody. Those who can afford to pay for it should still pay for it. And we should work towards getting tuition prices down, which again is a very sensible position to take, and a very sensible way of framing the issue. But again, the problem is that you've got student loans that are backed by the government. And that's where prices started skyrocketing and tuition started skyrocketing as soon as the government was the one guaranteeing the bill was going to be paid. And that's naturally how it goes. When the government's the one cutting the check, prices all of a sudden jump up. You see this all the time. When it comes to like military spending, and they are paying $700 for a toilet seat, or things along those lines. Although that may also just be a way of them hiding what they're actually spending stuff on. That might not be the best example on that. But the cost of college, you can trace it to when the government started guaranteeing these student loans, is when the prices started skyrocketing. So again, you kind of getting away from what the actual problem is, and that is government involvement. There should be an open market and a competitive market when it comes to higher education. And right now it's skewed the other way. It's the competition is to get into the school, but then they're just gonna charge you whatever. They've got bloated administration. I cannot believe the sizes of administrations on college campuses. It's insane. So again, kind of one of those things. I agree with the premise of what Mayor Pete was saying and kind of what he was getting at, but completely different routes of how we get there. And we need to not be pushing every single child to go to college either. It's not for everybody. And the trade schools are a great way to do apprenticeships. I mean, you could set yourself up very nicely for a good paying career that you can make some good money in and support a family. So one of the first kind of bigger arguments that broke out was Swalwell, who it made me happy that he got like no applause really much at all throughout the entirety of the debate. He got a few here or there, but nothing too big as he deserves. He's pretty trash. But so he brings up that Biden, I guess, had said something about passing the torch back in like the 70s or whatever. I can't remember exactly when. And so he was saying that that's what needs to occur now, that the older generation needs to pass the torch to the younger generation. And Biden responded by saying, no, I'm holding on to the torch, which was just kind of a funny thing to see. And it's, again, kind of like you see a bit of the hypocrisy that comes out of the left and the Democratic Party. You've got a lot of the narrative being driven by this idea that old white men are canceled, old straight white men are canceled and need to be ignored, or even not necessarily just kind of straight white men in general, and then not even straight white men in general necessarily, because I've seen some think pieces about how Mayor Pete may not be like they were. It was almost as if they were saying he wasn't like gay enough or gay in the right way, I guess. I don't know. So again, there's parts of the evangelical left that are just, you can't not please them in any way, shape, or form. But it does kind of make me giggle a bit that the leading in the polls, the leading candidates of the Democrat Party are two old white men. So that was just that was kind of the first little back and forth. Let's see here. Bernie and Kamala were the only ones on the stage that wanted to ban private insurance, although Kamala immediately began walking that back as soon as the debate was over and claimed she misunderstood the question and thought it was, would she give up her private insurance for Medicare for all or something along those lines. Already, I mean, she's just basically she's Hillary Clinton. She's basically the exact same type of candidate as Hillary Clinton. She's an awful human being, and you cannot take anything that she says seriously because what she's done in power is completely atrocious and in no way in line with what she's saying right now. And so it's just kind of funny that she's claiming these positions now that she's running for president that she's never, if she held them, she did the complete opposite of these positions while she actually was in a position of power as an attorney general. So we're going to talk about that more here in a second with something specific. Let's see. Mayor Pete made the claim that Medicare will outperform private insurance, making the argument that he wants to keep private insurance around for those who want to keep private insurance and then offer the public option for those, and then that if that's truly the better option, as they all believe it is, it will outperform, and then everybody will want to be on Medicare. Yeah, that's just not... There's nothing at all that tells me that that's going to be the case. Talk to a veteran, talk to people who have had to deal with the VA about how government-run health insurance works, and you'll hear some nightmare stories about how awful it is. And that's, gosh, I do not want that for the entirety of the population, and I certainly wouldn't want to be forced into a healthcare system like that. So, yeah, this idea that there's even candidates who are in support of completely banning private insurance is scary and just gross. So yeah, they were on the healthcare kick for a bit. Biden says he just wants to build on Obamacare and kind of finish what they started. which that worked out so well. But yeah, that whole you get to keep your doctor thing really didn't pan out at all. So let's see here. Bernie got asked how to implement universal health care, especially in the fact that it's failed in multiple states that it's been tried in, and he pretty much kind of avoided the question and couldn't really answer it. He said something about like, we'll get universal health care when millions of people rise up and say that that's what they want, which is all fine and dandy, and it's good to get, it gets the crowd riled up and it gets you applause, but that's not a plan. That doesn't tell me how we're going to get there or how the government's supposed to be effective at that when it's failed so drastically when it comes to the VA, and it fails so drastically at pretty much everything it does. So you're telling me more bureaucracy and more government is involved in healthcare? It comes up later on, but they bring up like the state of our public education. So you want that same entity that's failing our students? Our students are scoring lower and lower in comparison to the rest of the world every single year, and you want to put them in charge of healthcare? Hey, no, thank you. What we should be moving towards is an actual market in healthcare, free, open market in healthcare. No restricting it to within state lines, no monopolies in that way, and actually having competition and the whole. How much in the weeds do I want to get? Because I want to do a whole episode about healthcare, so I'm going to try not to get too into the weeds on any of this stuff, because a lot of them are episodes that I haven't done yet that they're planning on doing. So, yeah, there should be an absolute free and open marketplace for healthcare, because that's what's going to drive down costs. First of all, that's what's going to make it so that everybody can afford whatever type of insurance that they prefer, like the amount of coverage that they feel that they need, or that they want to pay for. And then it's also going to drive innovation as well. Competition breeds that kind of stuff. So let's see here. Bennett actually brought up something interesting too when he was talking about, because they were kind of arguing back and forth about abolishing private healthcare, and he was saying, somebody throughout the it might have been Bernie, throughout the example of Canada, and Bennett rightfully said, look, that's a country of 30 million people. We've got 300 million people in the United States. He's like, if we don't ban private and offer the public option, that would be about 30 million people on that public option. He's like, and that's how it could be successful. So again, kind of like a nice change of pace and a nice I don't know. Man, it's been a long weekend. I'm having trouble thinking of the word. Just a nice sentiment, I guess, to hear coming out of that side. Again, the only problem is that with something like this is if there's no such. What is the exact quote? I can't even remember who said it. Man, it has really been one of those weeks. But there's no thing more permanent than a temporary government program. So if you're talking about something like this, and this isn't even meant to be a temporary one, but you're talking about creating Medicare for all. That's the eventual goal would be like, even from folks who are saying they don't want to ban the private option, the eventual goal would to be pretty much the elimination of the private healthcare market, and that's definitely not the way that we want to go. And we've seen how bloated and insane the United States government has become right now, how large the bureaucracy is, and it would only get worse in a situation like something like healthcare. And okay, yeah, I'm gonna try not to get too into the weeds on that, because I do have a whole healthcare episode I want to do, and guests that I want to talk to and bring on who are in the healthcare industry and kind of get their advice on it. And I think it was Marianne Williamson brought up somebody, it might not have been her, somebody referred to what was going on at the border as state-sponsored crime. which was nice to hear. And my immediate thought was like, yes, now do taxes. Like, they're locking people in cages, and that's awful. And so talk about how, like, yeah, the point was like you're locking somebody in a cage who's seeking like a better life. They're not active, they haven't committed any crime other than crossing this arbitrary imaginary line that exists. And so, locking them in a cage is awful. Like, you couldn't just lock somebody in a cage for no reason in life. And so I'm like, yes, now do taxes. You couldn't just tell somebody that you're going to take 20% to 30% of their stuff, and if they disagree, you're going to lock them in the cage, and if they don't want to go in the cage, you're going to shoot them. So I know I'll never get something like that from the Democrat side. And then on the immigration thing, and this is where it kind of got interesting, Kamala was talking about wanting to let people out of cages, which is news to me, because it's funny that and now Kamala has an issue with separating parents from children, but she bragged about and cackled laughing about locking parents in cages for their students being truant. This same woman who talks about how you can't judge the unemployment rate because so many people have 2 or 3 jobs struggling and are still unable to pay their bills, which actually statistically we're at a low point for people with multiple jobs as well. It's only about 4% of people with multiple jobs. Anyway, so these same people, she's talking about that have that have 2 to 3 jobs and still can't pay the bills, and then she was bragging about locking parents up for kids being truant. So, they're out working their tails off to try to put food on the table and provide a roof for these kids. And then if the kid decides that they don't want to go to school anymore, you're going to lock up the parent. I mean, it's just kind of interesting that this is a situation where she's not okay with parents and children being separated and one of them being thrown in a cage, but it's totally cool when it's truancy. And I mean, I don't have kids. I plan to one day. But, growing up, like, it's pretty easy to fall in with the wrong crowd and then be influenced by them and, like, start skipping school. Like, you see that happen. I saw that happen plenty with certain kids at my school. So I could only imagine, like, at some point, there's only so much that the parent can actually do. They can't be there with the child every hour of the day to make sure, you can't sit in with them on classes. So that was just, there's a lot that Kamala Harris has done. It's disgusting how many people she put away for marijuana use and has locked people in a cage over marijuana, and then goes on the Breakfast Club and brags about smoking pot in college, and brags about listening to artists that didn't exist yet when she was going to college. But again, it's just kind of like she's Hillary. She's going to say whatever she needs to say or what she thinks people want to hear in order to make herself more electable. But she's not genuine at all. And you can't take anything that she says at value, because it could change drastically as soon as she gets into office and decides that, this is the way that she's going to want to govern. Let's see. Marianne Williamson, who she's just like a drunk wine mom up there, but she was definitely entertaining as hell. She brought up foreign policy in regards to immigration, which was really nice to hear. That was something I was complaining about from the first night, that nobody brought that up. Nobody brought up the war on drugs on this one, but at least Marianne brought up the foreign policy and how the United States foreign policy in Central and South America has helped to create this situation. So that was nice to hear. Biden wants to send money to the... Man, I should have taken better notes. I can't even remember who he was talking about sending money to. All right. Scratch that one. Eric didn't take good enough notes. They did bring up Obama deporting 3 million immigrants. That was kind of nice to hear as well. I feel like people kind of gloss over that about the Obama administration. I had the whole episode about the detention centers, concentration camps, whatever you want to call them, and I was pretty vocal and critical of the Obama administration and how they had done these exact same things. So it's kind of nice to at least hear that. They didn't get into like Obama locking up children in the same manner. And then Swalwell started talking about something else and nobody cheered for him. So Kamala brought up her time as an AG when talking about immigration and kind of like standing up to Obama and the amount that they were deporting. And again, it's just like, that is not a good basis on which to place your moral standing, is your time as Attorney General of California, because you were detrimental to people of color, as specifically blacks and Latinos in California. Your time was awful. You've locked up so many people of color over nonsense, and you're gonna brag about that. And that thing that people will say about that really grinds my gears, to borrow from Family Guy. They say, well, she was just good at her job. She was just good at being an attorney general. You can't hold that to... Yes, you can. If she were to actually believe any of this crap she's spewing on the stage or while she's been on the campaign trail, she had the perfect opportunity to affect real change. Real lasting change as an attorney general. She could have made a difference in the lives of every single person she threw into a cage over nonsense. She could have changed their lives for the better. And instead, she helped to ruin them. No, she wasn't good at her job. She's awful. At best, she doesn't believe what she's saying right now. Because she did nothing to show that any of what she's saying right now is what she truly believes in. So at best, she's just a politician working to get votes. At best. More likely, she's just a rotten person, an evil person who wants to wield that power and use that control. And she wants that power for that reason. It's just, again, she's Hillary. It's the same thing. She has no intention of doing good. She has no intention of trying to make people's lives better. She's power hungry. That's what she wants. It kills me to see friends of mine who define themselves as progressive coming out in support of Kamala Harris. And it's like, what are you talking? What are you talking? What possibly makes you think if she gets into another position of this kind of power that she's going to not be doing the exact same stuff she did when she was AG? It's insane. Goodness gracious. Bennett wants to push back on the trade war with China, which is good to hear as well. The trade war is stupid, and free trade is good for all involved. Specialization is good for all involved. It's kind of one of those things people can keep complaining, at least from kind of the right conservatives, or at least, the ones who are in support of this trade war and all these tariffs and everything. They're like, they keep dumping cheap goods on us. China keeps dumping cheap goods on us. Okay, so, what if it's free? What if they were dumping a bunch of free stuff on us? Like, what are you talking about? That's not a bad thing. Anyway, Yang also he was talking about the harm of the trade war. Unfortunately, he brought up Russia and like the whole collusion thing and meddling in our election with the whole like $23 or whatever they spent on Facebook ads. And again, it's just kind of one of those things. First of all, nobody does meddling in elections like the United States does meddling in elections. And when the United States government does meddling in elections, it usually involves a lot of death, a violent overthrow, and usually overthrowing a democratically elected leader for a tyrant. Or it results in a leader getting sodomized to death in the middle of the street, and then open air slave markets, or just the collapse of the entire country and region for the most part. So yeah, the whole Russia thing is a bit overplayed, and anyway. So Hickenlooper was talking about wanting police accountability when it talks, when it comes to improving like race relations and relations between cops and the community. Which again, yeah, absolutely. There needs to be more transparency, more accountability. It's ridiculous that in a situation where you have somebody who's supposed to be trained to handle situations, and you've got a normal civilian, the civilian is the one that's supposed to, or is somehow supposed to be expected to remain completely calm and not make any sort of mistakes, and the cop is allowed to be trigger happy and willing to shoot at a moment's notice. So yeah, there needs to be a lot more accountability when it comes to police. Again, that's an arm of the state. That's, aside from the military, the most violent arm of the state. People talk about, it came up in this debate about, mass shootings and the deaths that have gone on there. And those are horrible. And it's an awful thing to have happen. But when you look at the numbers, 3 times as many American citizens are killed by police officers last year than were killed in mass shootings. So we need to, if we're going to be talking about that, we need to be talking about this arm of the state and what it's doing in that regard, and how there needs to be more accountability. There needs to be better de-escalation training, and there needs to be a better manners and mechanisms in which these police departments can fire these officers or get rid of these officers. Let's see here. Kamala talks about race and profiling. Again, just ironic coming from somebody who locked up so many people of color. And then she attacked Biden, which was, it got into this interesting thing. She kind of, she called him racist without calling him racist. She prefaced, "I don't think you're a racist, but..." Michael Malice has a great saying of, everything before "but" in a political statement can be ignored. And then Biden essentially called Kamala a cop, which was funny as well, which is also true. And again, it's nice to see somebody calling that out and trying to hold her accountable, because it's just kind of interesting. Tulsi got asked about how she used to hold anti-LGBTQ views back in the day, but nobody asked Kamala about her record as an AG. Just kind of interesting that didn't come up. Gillibrand wants publicly funded elections. She was pushing that a lot. That was kind of like the main thing. She kept coming back to it. I guess that's going to be kind of like the focus of her campaign, in which she kept interrupting with questions that weren't really pertaining to publicly funded elections and bringing it back to publicly funded elections. And so that seems to be, it's kind of, I'm not saying that as like a knock against her. That's kind of like what everybody did. Tulsi certainly did that on the first night with anti-war stuff, although I feel like that's a much better position to be taking and to be stressing over and over again, is the end of these forever wars. Okay, I was about to go off on a tangent about Tulsi again, but we'll keep it, we'll talk about that maybe in the next episode. I'll touch on a couple things in the next episode. It'll be kind of like a potpourri. Biden just kind of sounded out of touch about a lot of things. It's just kind of, it sounds like he's an older guy that doesn't really necessarily understand where things are nowadays, or especially kind of where his party is. Although I was reading a lot of, not a lot, but I was reading some articles from more moderate Democrats saying that it felt like the party was being pushed too far to the left at an insane rate. So maybe that might work out for him. He bragged about raising taxes, which again is just, I understand that's what you're going to get on a debate like this. But it's just, it'd be one thing again, and I'm hesitant almost to even say this and get accused by some of like being pro taxation. But it'd be one thing if you were talking about raising taxes while on the other hand talking about decreasing spending, and you were saying that as a strictly like, look, it's going to suck to get this debt paid down. We got to tighten up. We're going to have to pay more taxes. We're going to have to cut spending drastically. And that's how we're going to get out of this situation. Now, I wouldn't agree with that. I think there's other ways that we can get out of the situation without raising taxes. But at least I could be like, I can at least respect the reasoning that you're given, even though I completely disagree with the premise and believe that you're just talking about stealing more. That being said, that's not what's being talked about at all. So we're just talking about raising taxes to raise taxes, and no talk whatsoever of curtailing spending. Nobody mentioned that. Again, not to be expected on the Democrat stage, but Bernie doesn't believe in court packing, which was, again, kind of a refreshing thing. He mentioned something about cycling judges out and not making them lifetime decisions. He didn't really get into it further. I'm kind of interested into what he was saying. I wouldn't be completely against that idea myself. It's just kind of, again, it's kind of like this weird existence where they have all this power, but they're not elected. Although I don't know that elections of Supreme Court justices would be the, most, logical way to go about it either. That's a weird one. The Supreme Court's a weird one. I haven't entirely fleshed that out and what I think might be the best. But I'd be interested to hear that cycling thing that Bernie was talking about. That sounds like something that could be, somewhat feasible or maybe better than the system that we have now. It'd be interesting for sure. So let's see here. Kamala slams Trump on North Korea and Russia. So the interesting thing about this is like, there's definitely been like, Trump has said some incredibly foolish things, and has appeared to be overly cordial, I think would be the best way of putting it, with Putin, in situations, and kind of too jovial and too joking, and like joking about, fake news and like having that problem with a man who literally kills journalists, and there's like a very long detailed list about the journalists that he's killed. So I understand where people get upset with that, and how that adds fuel to this whole Russia collusion fire. But the fact is that like Trump has been very antagonistic of Russia in every other way. It just doesn't really get focused on. We put more troops at Russia's border, more NATO troops at Russia's border than have been there throughout the Obama administration. Obviously, he's been flirting with entering into Syria and entering into a war there, which is, again, completely not what Russia wants to have happen. So, again, it's just kind of, it's this interesting thing where he keeps getting accused of being in bed with Russia, but everything he's doing outside of the way in which he talks to Putin says otherwise. And then the whole slamming him on North Korea, again, I understand coming off as too cordial or too jovial or speaking too amicably about Kim Jong-un. I get that. The dude's a dictator. He's basically got 25 million slaves living under him. I understand that. And so I get maybe where the rhetoric is wrong, but that's not where they're coming at him from. And again, Diplomacy is not talking to people who you're friends with. It's talking to people you don't like. It's talking to your enemies. And the fact that we're getting this much movement out of a North Korean dictator, the North Korean leader, this is huge. It's huge for that region, and hoping to try to get the nuclear threat lowered. And it's huge for the people of North Korea. As again, I've said it on this podcast, but Michael Malice put it great. His sole concern is the 25 million people living in slavery in North Korea. What are we doing? What can we do to help them? And that's what it comes down to. And if it means entertaining this dictator and speaking with him, again, I get it. Trump does not need to be as complimentary of him as he has been. Completely get that, and I completely agree. But the fact is that we're taking steps with North Korea that haven't been taken before. And again, there's 25 million people we're talking about here. So we need to be applauding steps that we're taking. Like what he did today. He walked across the border. He met in the DMZ with Kim Jong-un and walked across the border. He's the first sitting president to cross into North Korea. Like, that's huge. This is a huge deal. This is progress that's being made. Progress towards opening up North Korea, bringing in trade and economic freedom, and then freedom of the people will likely follow. It's the same thing that's kind of going on in China. They can only keep this authoritarian hold for so long. You know, they have these economic free zones where it's kind of just more of a capitalist area. It's like in the bigger cities where they call them these economic free zones, and that type of thinking is infectious. When you're economically free in an area but you're not free in other ways, it's only a matter of time before you start demanding that freedom in all of your life. So again, I don't understand the North Korea bashing for the rhetoric about Kim Jong-un all you want. Again, totally agree. But the fact is that we're making progress there, and that shouldn't be looked down upon. Hickenlooper, again, sounding pretty reasonable as he did throughout the entirety of the debate, was talking about how we shouldn't be demonizing business. So, couldn't agree more on that. I get it. I get corporatism is incredibly frustrating. Crony capitalism is incredibly frustrating. That's not what I want either. I want free markets, more competition, and less regulation that these corporations can write to keep out others from challenging them. Biden wants to rejoin the Paris Climate Accord. Not working out so well for France, who have had demonstrations by the Yellow Vests for over 30 weeks in a row now. It's really, yeah. So, again, it's just kind of one of those things. It was pretty much just a circle jerk for the people signing it. There's nothing in there that was actually going to hold any of these countries accountable for this agreement. And then it was basically, we're just going to be the United States is going to be shelling out a bunch of money, again, with no guarantee that any of what was agreed upon is going to actually be carried out. Like, none of the money that was going to be given out was subject to people, these countries following these rules. So it was just a public circle jerk for the most part, as far as the Paris Climate Accord goes. As I brought up earlier, I have written down here, Williamson is a wine mom. I'm not sure what exactly part in the debate that was referring to. But yeah, Bernie was just coming off as kind of hot air. He just kept saying a lot of the same stuff. Like, he wasn't actually presenting any plans, which is why I see why some people are pushing Elizabeth Warren out as the better candidate, because she has plans, quote unquote, or at least claims to have plans. Whereas Bernie just keeps kind of talking about, we need a revolution and blah, blah, blah. And he just, the top 1% of the top 10% of the top 40% have all of the wealth. And, he just keeps throwing out these numbers over and over again. Even though he's also, he's in the 1% himself. Mr. wants to take all this money from other people. He himself is a millionaire, owns 3 homes, donates nothing in comparison. And when asked about it, he was like, "Oh, I wrote a book. If you want to make a bunch of money, write a book." Isn't that funny? How capitalism works for you in that regard. But you're the same one who was praising the Soviet Union. And that was like right after right after Chernobyl happened. And then they were asking him, like, what you want to do. What would be one of the first things you did as president? Like, day one, basically. Swalwell said end gun violence, which is... Okay, bro. Good luck with that. It's just a stupid answer. So I thought that was about as stupid as it was going to get. But then Biden got even stupider. So, first day as president, Biden says he wants to defeat Trump. Well, if it's your first day as president, you will have already done that, Mr. Joe Biden. So, again, it's kind of one of those things where you can get points for being anti-Trump in this type of debate, but that's not always an answer that makes any amount of sense. So Swalwell wants gun confiscation. Don't let it be twisted any other way. He can call it a gun buyback, but he's saying it's a mandatory buyback. Well, what happens when they don't bring them in to be bought back? You'd have to confiscate them, then, wouldn't you? New Zealand had their gun buyback after the Christchurch shootings, and there's 530 people that brought back their guns to be bought back. So, yeah, Swalwell is also the guy who has basically said that, like, oh, it wouldn't matter if the people rose up in America because the government has nukes. So that just kind of tells you where his head is at. Bernie throws out the number that 40,000 people die a year from guns. Well over 33,000 of those are suicides, which is unfortunate, but also heavily skews that. And then it's also, gun violence is at an all-time low, regardless, despite what you may hear, despite how it's presented in the news, gun violence is at an all-time low. And it's always interesting when they bring up this thing, they always ignore Chicago and New York, two of the highest areas, New Orleans, two of the highest areas of gun violence. Gosh, man, it's been a week. But these cities with incredibly high levels of gun violence, and especially Chicago. Chicago is insane right now, the amount of gun violence that's going on there. And they've got some of the strictest gun laws in the nation. So it's just kind of interesting that those never get brought up when talking about gun control. Kamala says she will use an executive order to infringe on the Second Amendment. She was saying that a lot, actually. So Kamala, again, kind of what it goes back to, she just wants the power. And she's basically has said, like, if Congress doesn't do it, I'm just going to do it through an executive order. So how very tyrannical of you. But again, I think that's exactly who she is as a person. So it doesn't surprise me in any way, shape, or form that she wants to talk about that. So Biden bragged about the foreign policy under Obama, which, what? But he did say that he wants to pull out of Afghanistan, which is good. So on the same thing, it's like, okay, so why didn't y'all pull out under Obama? Why did y'all start all these extra wars? Why did you kill so many civilians? Why did you use so many drone strikes? More drone strikes than any other president has ever used. And drones kill like over 90% of people killed by drone strikes are innocent civilians. And collateral damage to the actual target that they're trying to get at. Bernie brought up Yemen, which was great as well. I appreciated him bringing up the absolute awfulness of what's going on. It's horrific what's going on there. I've seen some of the pictures of these kids that are starving. They're eating leaves. What Saudi Arabia is doing to Yemen right now is disgusting. And it's one of the many reasons why I think that Trump should be charged with war crimes and executed when found guilty of them. Like, all these people talk about impeachment and all this stuff that Trump is doing and all these, imaginary collusion and all this kind of stuff. There's legitimate reasons that we should be after calling on Trump to be impeached or calling on him to be facing criminal charges. And it's not whatever this Russia hoax crap is. There's real stuff going on. A real genocide in Yemen. So I was really glad that Bernie brought that up. He also said he doesn't want war with Iran, which is also nice to hear. Andrew Yang really got shafted in this, and he brought up after the debate that they turned his mic off at multiple points throughout the debate when he was trying to speak up to make a point, and his mic was turned off. And there's actually a video posted where you see this occur. You see him like raising his hand, and he's speaking, and there's nothing coming over the microphone, but like two other people are speaking at the same time, and both of their microphones are on. So really unfortunate that he got shafted the way that he did. He brought up libertarians in his closing statements, which was nice to hear. It's always nice to get a shout out that it's this growing movement that more and more people are at least somewhat aware of, and big reason why the show exists. I'm trying to get out there more and get the libertarian voice out there more, so people aren't just aware of what it is, but can actually get a description of why it is that libertarians believe what they believe. Mayor Pete wants to stop endless war, so again, glad to hear that. That was nice to hear. And wanting to, it's nice to hear those. That's why I'm such a big fan of Tulsi, because she has made it the cornerstone of her campaign. She's never not talking about it. Whereas, like, for most of this debate, it only came up when it was brought up, when foreign policy was brought up, as opposed to just making it a cornerstone. And then lastly, Bernie mentioned stagnant wages on the working class. What never gets brought up in this, when we're talking about the plight of the working class and any sort of economic disparity or all any of that kind of stuff, wage disparity, wealth disparity, nobody talks about how the Fed has destroyed the purchasing power of the dollar, and now the purchasing power of the dollar is at an all-time low, and that's a direct result of the Fed. And again, we're gonna have a whole long episode about the Fed and why it needs to go. But it's just kind of interesting. Again, not surprising, but nobody brings that up. Ron Paul did back in the day during his runs, but nobody brings that up. That's a huge part of this. The purchasing power of the dollar has been diminished by insane amounts. So that's a huge part of it. You bring up the minimum wage and how it hasn't been raised since, whatever year that they throw out. If you look at like what the minimum wage was in like the 60s, before they stopped making, before they stopped using silver to actually create the coinage, like, quarters or whatever, the minimum wage was like $4 or something, and or something like that, whatever it was. Basically what it is like the price of silver, like what you would have gotten paid in minimum wage in silver today, is worth $16.25. So way above the minimum wage as it is now, and even above the minimum wage that all of the Democrats are saying they want, $15 an hour. So again, this is a money problem. This is a purchasing power problem, and it's a Fed problem that we're talking about here. It's not going to be fixed by just raising minimum wage. You fix it by getting rid of the Fed and having sound money principles. Competing currencies, too. So that was pretty much it for the second night a more frustrating night for sure. Like within the first 10 minutes, there was a part where like 4 people were talking at once. And I don't think there was any point in the first debate where 4 people were talking at once. And that happened a lot during this debate. So, yeah, it was interesting. Again, I got what I expected, and I wasn't expecting to hear really many libertarian points on that stage. But it was interesting to say the least. At this point right now, based on what I am seeing and the distance to the left that the entire field seems to be pushing itself towards, like trying to out woke each other, I think Trump will win pretty handily again in 2020. Based on right now, what I'm seeing, I don't see a candidate out there, except for maybe Tulsi. Again, that's kind of biased. But I think her anti-war rhetoric would really carry throughout most of the country. Most of the country is tired of the endless wars. So I don't hold any crazy notions that Tulsi's going to get the nomination. She's going to be ignored. Her stances, her anti-war stance and anti-interventionist stance is being defined as isolationist and a conservative stance, which is just... So you're telling me that not bombing other countries and not sending our troops to die in other countries is the same as being isolationist? Anyway, yeah, so that was interesting to see. I can't remember when the next debates are going to be, but the field will be considerably smaller by that point. You have to have 130,000 individual donors and be at like 2% polling. So I suspect it'll probably be down to like 5 to 7, 8 folks on that stage, maybe. Just kind of depends. So we'll keep an eye on that. Hoping Tulsi gets on that stage. And yeah, I watched these so y'all didn't have to if you didn't want to. And I completely understand why people don't want to. It is funny. As much as I loathe the government and the state, I've always been super interested in politics. Things like this have always been something that have interested me and that I pay attention to and that I'll watch. So, but I completely understand why people don't want to watch stuff like this, especially ones like this. You're really splitting hairs on where people, like where there's differences in opinion on this kind of stuff. So, there wasn't anything too eye-opening about these debates except for just kind of how far left the goalpost has been moved as far as the Democratic Party goes. So it'll be interesting to kind of see what happens and to see where things go from here. So the next episode, I know I said I was going to do like a breakdown of kind of the main talking points from these debates, but there was nothing that came out that like I don't plan on doing a podcast episode about. So I'm just going to save it for that instead. There's some stuff that happened from this weekend. It'll be kind of like a potpourri-esque episode, the one that I record tomorrow. There's some stuff with Antifa that came out, and then just kind of some other stuff that I wanted to talk about. So we'll get into that tomorrow. But thanks again for listening. You are a sovereign individual, and I will keep watching all this stuff and giving my views on it so that you don't have to watch it if you don't want to. Because I completely get why people get fed up with politics. Thanks again, y'all.